This is the only case in history where a police force officially documented a paranormal encounter. It wasn't a movie, it wasn't a myth. It was a report filed in 1992 in Vallecas, Spain. And what they witnessed inside that apartment is beyond a human explanation. It's never normal or familiar among different horror genres to find a movie starting with a very clear sentence that says, "This film is based on a true story that actually happened." At that moment, you will find your mind starting to pay more attention. Your concentration will be high, and your level of fear will be higher as well. This is because, depending on the events you will see and watch, and the extent of your imagination of how much it affected the person who experienced this story. However, let us also say that even if the film is based on real events, you will find the filmmakers exaggerating excessively in front of the camera. Usually, what happens is that the true story is something ordinary but disturbing. But of course, the writers simply add a supernatural element. There are always exceptions based on events that appear to be supernatural, such as the Warren files in the movie The Conjuring, Annabelle, or The Nun. But usually, the real-life events the story is based on are less scary than the movie itself. However, that was not the case in the case known as Vallecas, which is a true case or story about a young girl named Estefanía Gutiérrez Lazaro. Estefanía was living in Madrid, Vallecas, and this was the true story behind the movie Verónica, on which, like many films of this genre, it was written. This film is based on a true story, but the only difference here is that the true or realistic story was more terrifying and horrific than the film. The film based its treatment on the police report, which to this day is considered the only time a formal police report on paranormal activity has ever been documented. All of this, in truth, was an introduction to what you are about to hear, which, to say the least, is a case of pure horror and terror. Prepare yourselves for what you are about to hear, and let us now begin the story itself, and say Bismillah. With you, Rami Samak, and your channel, Horror Maestro. In the late summer of 1991, Estefanía Gutiérrez Lazaro passed away at only 18 years old. This was after she fell into a coma at the hospital. At the time, doctors didn't find anything wrong happening to her, despite a series of hospital visits over the past years, and of course, with many problems happening at home. They couldn't find a cause of death. They wrote in the medical records at the time that Estefanía's death was a sudden and suspicious death. But the bigger problem in this story wasn't the girl's death. No, it was the events that led to this death and what happened afterward. Let us go back in time a year before the death and the hospital report. In March 1990, Estefanía went to school on a very normal day. just like any other teenager girl. During the school day, she and a group of her friends decide to have an adventure. And the adventure was just a game. But it wasn't just any game. The game they decided to play was a Ouija board, which one of her friends managed to sneak into the school. It's alleged that Estefania's sister, Marianella, was one of this group, but she didn't participate in the game. Instead of letting her play with them, she was tasked with guarding the door so that no other student or teacher would enter on them, while Estefania and her friends were trying to contact the spirits. At first, there was nothing out of the ordinary, but the matter ended with the teacher breaking into the room where they were playing and taking the glass board they were playing with from them. The glass that the group was using instead of the planchette broke. The strange thing here, according to everyone in the group and the testimony of Marinella and the teacher, is that smoke came out of this glass, which Estefania inhaled unintentionally. Everyone around Estefania confirms that all the changes that, according to her, after the Ouija board incident were noticeable and immediate. Although they started small, they began to escalate very quickly. The matter began to significantly affect Estefania's sleep. She suffered from insomnia frequently, and whenever she was able to sleep, she would have horrifying and frightening nightmares of shadowy creatures that were calling out to her. In most cases, she don't even need to sleep because of the experiences she was going through, because her family said that Estefania told them she could see shadows walking behind her in the corners of the room, hearing voices from the bottom whispering to her, asking her to go with them, to the point that she would go into recurring comes that would usually last from 15 to 20 minutes. According to the testimony of her mother, Concepcion Gutierrez, when she was able to escape them, she would say that she was in a long, foggy hallway. The voices she always heard reached her even in this coma as well. Estefania's mother and father, Maximo, took her to the hospital several times before she died. But all of that was to no avail. During these times, she met countless specialists in various fields, and this happened in 4 different medical centers. But every time she went, the doctors didn't notice anything wrong happening to her, despite performing all kinds of tests and x-rays. After that, the symptoms started to worsen with each passing day. The things in the apartment were moving around her. Appliances were turning on and off by themselves. The invisible forces become very violent, not just towards Estefania alone, but the matter also developed towards the members of her family. Her younger siblings would walk up hitting hands on the wall. Their dog was thrown out of the room, and even one of her younger siblings was pushed by a hidden thing. Her sister Marinella, who shared a room with Estefanía, once said that she woke up at night to find Estefanía fluttering or flying silently above her bed. After a while, Estefanía began to attack her siblings herself. She became violent and aggressive, grunting and screaming at her younger brother. On one occasion, it was said that she attacked one of her sisters, and her violence reached the point that she inflicted very difficult wounds on the girl, to the point that the matter ended with the girl on the floor and foam coming out of her mouth. What is worse than that is that Estefanía wasn't the only person who saw these things in the house and was exposed to them. Although she was a main target, and that is very clear, her father, mother, and siblings also suffered from things moving by themselves in the house. Doors would close and open by themselves. They also saw all the shadows or specters moving clearly. The family bathroom was being used for many purposes other than the purpose of relieving oneself. And this is by the family's own statement, which was considered the center of all supernatural activities in the apartment. In one of the cases that occurred, Estefanía went to the bathroom to do some housework. She saw a shadow or an entity, and then the iron turned on by itself. Estefanía screamed, and her mother went to check on her. At that time, the door locked behind her, and there was nothing for Maximo, Estefanía's father, to do but to go to help them get out. The door was hard and wouldn't open, and at that time, Maximo was about to kick the door with his foot literally, only to find the door opened easily. In addition to all this, most of the guests and neighbors who came to the apartment had their own different experiences with the paranormal occurring inside the Gutierrez house. After all that happened, the final nail in Estefanía's coffin began when she started to suffer from seizures. These seizures started relatively early, but they worsened over time. But in the few nights before her death, they become more severe, until on one of the nights she suffered from a severe seizure to the point that she entered a coma from which she never woke up, and she died a few hours later. As I said in the beginning, the doctors were not able to find an explanation for her death. Of course, most people who hear this will say that the matter stopped there and all the strange events ended, but the truth is not what happened. Unfortunately for the Gutierrez family, the terrifying activity that was happening didn't stop with the death of their daughter. While it seems that all this activity started with Estefanía and the Ouija session she did with her friends, it's clear that all the evil forces that were allowed to enter are now here to stay even after Estefanía's death. What happened is that after her death, things go much worse. Concepcion, Estefanía's mother, reported that she heard Estefanía screaming from all parts of the apartment. And this was happening throughout the daylight hours. There was also almost constant knocking on the walls. Also, what was more terrifying is that the things in the apartment continued to move by themselves, and the appliances were still turning on and off on their own according to their desire. Many times, the sound of breaking glass and the laughter of an old man were heard, and the doors continued to close and open by themselves. Also, Estefania's siblings continued to wake up and get hurt because of the unknown that was in the house. Also, what happened in the particularly disturbing situation and occasion 2 years after Estefania's death. A picture of her that was in the living room fell, and fire ignited in it spontaneously and terrifyingly. No part of the picture was damaged except the part where her face appears, but the rest of the picture and its frame didn't have anything happen to them. With all this, and after Estefania's death, Concepcion and Maximo were fed up with their family's suffering. They began to turn to and look for experts and investigators in the paranormal, whose job is to detect the supernatural. At that time, a number of people in different teams actually began to flock to them in the apartment, but none of them could help them. And we can say that some of them made the matter and the activity of the unknown entities worse. The situation and activity continued to escalate without any rest at all, regardless of the place to which Estefania's father and mother moved, until one night, which was the night of November 19, 1992, at which point things reached a boiling point after they had finally lost hope and were fed up with all the activities that had been happening for a long time, and were at their absolute end, and were not finding any help to rid them of what they were in. At that time, Concepcion, the mother, turned to the police. Concepcion called the police officer around 2 a.m. When they answered her, she seemed to be screaming, "Please, come quickly, it's there, it's here." It wasn't clear who she was talking about, but the police reported described that Concepcion seemed to be very terrified. At that night, they began to calm her down so that she could explain to them what was happening. She began to speak and tell what was happening. At that time, the telephone operator was surprised by what she was saying and doubted her words. And at that time, he transferred her to the police directly, who were also doubting her words to a large extent. They asked to speak with her husband to make sure she wasn't drunk or lying to them. And when Maximo told them the same story with the same tone of panic, the police asked to speak with one of the children. And at that time, the same thing happened. Here they called some of the severe patrols that are on the streets, and they actually took their way to the Gutierrez house, which was located on Calle Gerardo Nunes, house number 8, which is in Vallecas. a neighborhood located in Madrid. The patrol actually arrived, which consisted of 5 police officers and a detective. They found Concepcion, Maximo, and 2 of the children waiting for them outside the house. And they were, as the police noticed, preferring to wait outside the house in the cold and rain than to be inside the house. The police began to calm them down and entered the house with them and began to ask about what was happening. Maximo explained all the supernatural and unfamiliar events that were happening to them, and also some new events that had also started to happen, which included inverted crosses on the walls, and that scratch marks were also appearing on the wall. The boys kept listening to him while they were doubting, but the officers agreed to take a look at what was happening around them. Concepcion told them that things were always much worse with the lights turned off. At that time, Detective Jose Pedro Negri, who was responsible for the police patrol, ordered them to turn off the light. And what was unexpected for them happened, which aroused terror within them. They all began to hear noise in the apartment. Quickly they returned to turn on the lights again, but the whole family was still standing with them. And this proves that none of them is the one who did that. The police began to head towards the main bedroom to investigate a sound they thought was coming from it. At that time, they heard a loud knocking sound from the window, and it was said that they also heard someone screaming from the same direction. They quickly went towards it to search, but there was nothing at all towards the window. There was nothing indicating that anything had fallen, and certainly there was nothing capable of making the noise they heard, which seemed as if a large rock had fallen. And also, there was nothing around it to make the sound of the screaming they heard. In addition to that, there were 2 officers discussing what should be done when someone screams at the other to shatter the thing they heard, and who did that. At the exact same time they were talking, a very cupboard door opened above their heads, and there was no one else in the room except for the 2 officers who were present. Because of this, 4 officers decided that the matter was more than necessary for them and chose to wait outside the house. Detective Negri and the other officer continued searching for the cause of the sound, but they found nothing. And instead of that, they heard more and more noise coming from Estefania's room. Upon investigation, they found a cross removed from the wall, and with it, there was also a statue of Jesus that was detached from the cross itself. This cross was fixed on the wall before. There was glue under it, but they found in its place 3 claw marks. Suddenly, Negri and the other officer found themselves surrounded by the sound of shielding, and things began throwing at the walls. But as happened in the events before that, they found no source or explanation for what was happening. At the same time, Concepcion told the officers about the bathroom, and when they went to search it, They admitted afterward in their report that they felt a sharp drop in the temperature, and each of them said that they heard quiet voices echoing inside the bathroom walls. Of course, after they heard and saw enough, Negri called the police station and told them about what was happening. And afterward, an official report was able to be written in which it was mentioned that he had no explanation for what was happening inside the Gutierrez house. But everything was certainly happening. This was the first and the only time in the history of Spain and almost all over the world and its history that a member of the police force wrote about supernatural events in an official report. After these events, the Gutierrez family stayed in their house for a little longer, and although the events began to subside, they didn't disappear by any means. In the end, the Gutierrez family moved away, and according to them and their testimony, the supernatural activities they experienced and lived with for a while didn't follow them. Also, the truth is that the new family that moved to live in their house didn't report any events from the time they moved into the house. But they left the apartment again. It's just an apartment. Yes, but certainly an apartment that has a terrifying and frightening past. Fortunately, the Gutierrez family's nightmare ended. And this is of course despite their loss and their losing an important individual in their family because of these events. And despite the existence of pointing fingers of accusation or blaming, this gives us a very important lesson, which is that we shouldn't play with a Ouija board or any game that arouses curiosity, which have become very many now. Do not do the idea of spirit summoning or what is called spirit provocation. Let the spirits rest in peace. And if you happen to contact them, don't forget to say goodbye. This was a true story of the movie Verónica, the film that handled the story in a simple way to some extent compared to the original or true story. As I said, don't play with what we have no business in. Don't let our curiosity take us and expose us to things we have no experience in dealing with. Always stay walking on the principle of we are in our business and they are in theirs. Unfortunately, many experiences and many cases of those what were shown here on the channel were because of curiosity. Curiosity that doesn't leave us alone and eats at our brains and minds and makes us, without awareness or will from us, succumb to many things just to satisfy it. If you arrive to this point, please leave your comment to tell me what you need to hear next time.